I stepped into Zhonghua University for a visit, and on that day, at the alumni hall, I saw a blurry yet familiar photo. I heard that this lady is Professor Tristan's lifelong muse, but unfortunately, she went missing over 20 years ago. The woman in the photo had shoulder-length hair, wearing a moon-white qipao, holding a scroll of poems in her hand, exuding an air of scholarly elegance. A heavy, suffocating feeling filled my chest instantly. Standing in the corner, I blinked slowly, and torrents of silent tears fell. This is my mom. Since I can remember, her right leg has been crippled, and she always huddled in the corner, her whole body covered in horrifying scars. Over the past 20 years, Gavin, wielding an iron rod, has repeatedly struck her frail and emaciated body. Yet, I was once one of the culprits who pushed her towards the brink. In the midst of emotional breakdown, I chose to plunge into the river, but by a twist of fate, I unexpectedly traveled back to the past. Back to a time when my mom was still leading a normal life, not yet abducted. My biological father was a person addicted to domestic violence, suffering from moderate bipolar disorder. He would often pace back and forth in the village, his eyes filled with bloodshot veins. When encountering the village women, he behaved like a mad dog, intentionally brandishing objects to intimidate them. As for my mom, it's said that when he was young and not afflicted by the illness, he abducted her himself from Zhonghua University. The villagers avoided having too much interaction with my biological father and dared not inquire or intervene in our family matters. After all, getting involved in such matters was something to be avoided. So, almost every other day, the sharp cries of either me or my mom echoed through the entire lonely village. When I was 8 years old, he brutally beat my mom with an iron rod, and as I stood in front of her to shield her, he ruthlessly grabbed my hair and repeatedly slammed my head against the wall. After that beating, I lost hearing in my left ear. Being timid, I ran away from this home, surviving on leftover food and scavenging for 3 whole days on the streets. Those were the most peaceful days of my life. So much so that later, when he had an episode, I instinctively ran away, leaving my limping mom to face everything alone. Each time I sneaked back after hiding outside for half a day, I knelt in front of my mom, tightly holding her palm, crying with snot and tears streaming down. "Mom, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." However, the next time, under extreme panic when he brought out the iron rod or tongs, I still chose to abandon her, fleeing like mad until the cursing voices of the men in the yard completely stopped, then tremblingly rushing towards the corner where my mom lay on the verge of unconsciousness. Although I claimed to be afraid of her death, when disasters struck, all that filled my mind was self-preservation. So, I have been a detestable, extremely selfish, and cowardly little monster since childhood. I should have been one of the most hated and loathed individuals in my mom's life. What saddens me is that she never uttered a word of blame against me, shouldering all the hardships on her own. Many nights, she silently shed tears, gently pressing her bruised forehead against my deaf left ear. "Sava, don't be afraid, Mom is here." She was kind to me, never harboring resentment. Even later, during my adolescence, when that beastly nature in him attempted to bully me, my mom, for the first time limping, dragged a rusty iron rod and smashed it towards the back of the old beast's head. The old beast dodged it, once again ruthlessly punching and kicking my mom without mercy. Yet, as a despicable and weak child, I always turned away and fled when my mom stood up for me. Even later, acting recklessly, I trampled on her few remaining kindnesses, stealing my mom's final aspirations. I was one of the culprits who pushed her towards the brink. She should hate me. At the age of 16, I secretly took the money my mom had hidden under the stove, paid my school fees, and bought new textbooks. The air that day was fragrant, and my drunken father was still in a deep sleep, a rare night without curses. I groggily saw my mom neatly dressed, a spring breeze on her face, dragging her lame leg, quietly leaving the house as the night fell. Suddenly awakened, I stealthily followed her out of the village. Across the road, I watched as she hailed a bus, carefully taking out a black cloth bundle from her embrace. However, the money inside the bundle had all been replaced with paper by me. My mom could only stand there, watching the bus that carried all her hopes drive away. Then, she jumped into the river. "Mom." My mind went blank, and from a height, I stumbled and flew out, awkwardly using both hands and feet to jump into the river, pulling my mom towards the shore. Her emaciated hand, like a withered tree branch, showed no signs of life. Just when I thought she would scold me or even hit me to vent her anger, my mom merely covered her face with her cracked hands. When she lowered them, tears streamed down her face. The expression of disappointment mixed with scattered despair repeatedly corroded my weak and despicable heart. I inexplicably became furious. Sitting by the shore, I knelt in front of my mom, tightly holding her wrist, with a teary voice taking the initiative. "You're my mom, since you gave birth to me, you have to take responsibility for me. You can't just run away and leave me behind, that's selfish." The shouted words rang out loud and clear. I just wanted her to wait a little longer, wait until I graduated from high school in 2 years, and then we, mother and daughter, could escape together. I could work outside to take care of her. In case she really left, and only that person remained at home, I would truly be humiliated to death. But as the words jumped out of my mouth, they turned into icy and piercing ice cones. Everything became a stubborn and insincere declaration. Yet, at that time, I still naively believed that time could smooth all the pain. I was her daughter, her only family she could trust and be close to. However, the immature me failed to realize that every day of my existence was whipping my mom's memories of the years of domestic violence. For most women abducted, their children and their so-called husbands became indirect culprits, forcing them to leave their loved ones. Their family, distant in reality, hidden in their distant memories, became the most difficult hope to touch. Since that day, my mom became like a lifeless shell, only capable of breathing. She no longer spoke, nor called me Sava. Even though I shielded my mom time and time again, she remained in a soulless state, her eyes vacant, devoid of any reaction. Later, after researching, I came to understand that my mom's condition was a type of mental illness. However, at that time, I knew nothing, thinking she blamed me. It was so desperate. I believed that as long as I could bring her away when I had the ability, make her live a better life, and help her find her family, she would forgive me. But I didn't even know when my mom fell ill. In those 3 years, I endured the mockery and insults from campus bullies, saying, "How can a deaf person daydream during the day?" Yet, I persisted in studying like crazy on the rooftop of the school building. As long as I could pass the exam, I could take my mom away, redeeming myself for my selfishness from years ago. So, I had to succeed. This ridiculous and tragic thought lingered in my mind for over 2 years, pushing me onto a path where success was the only option. It almost drove me crazy. But whenever I thought of my mom trapped at home, I dared not let myself make any mistakes. After all, she only had me. In 2007, at the age of 18, after finishing the college entrance examination, I became one of the only 2 high school students from our town to be admitted to a university. However, on the afternoon when I received the admission letter, I sold it to a wealthy family in the neighboring town. Because my mom's condition was far from what it used to be, the idea of taking her away had long surpassed my desire for university life. I could retake the exams, but I only had this one mom. I just wanted to leave with her as soon as possible. 1 hour before going to the neighboring town to get the money, I crouched in front of my mom, gently holding the curled-up figure in the corner, and rubbed her forehead. "Mom, you must wait for me to come back, I'll take you away." The deaf me, weak for countless years, could finally take my mom far away. Running on the free path in the countryside, sweating profusely, I couldn't help but burst into tears under the scorching summer wind. When I returned home with a backpack full of money from the town 10 kilometers away, my house was surrounded by a circle of people. The most eye-catching was the slightly faded police car parked on the outer edge of the crowd. "Mom!" I frantically pushed through the crowd and rushed into the yard, but accidentally stumbled and fell to the ground. In the scorching summer heat, I fell with the backpack shielding me, the palms scraped by stones burning painfully, but my whole body couldn't stop shivering. He was held down by several policemen, unable to move, cursing with dirty words. My mom lay in the courtyard, a clean white cloth tightly covering her entire body. She didn't wait for my return. When the old beast fell ill, he beat my mom to death with an iron hoe. I clutched the money and, amidst the villagers' whispers, carried my mom's ashes in a sandalwood box, embarking on a journey to Ninghui. This was my debt to my mom. Boldly, I heard that Zhonghua University was located in the center of Ninghui City. Holding the wooden box packed with my mom's remains, I boarded a southbound green train without considering whether I, traveling alone for the first time, would get lost or encounter any dangers. Perhaps, at that moment, all I cared about was escaping from that polluted place. Fortunately, maybe after years of misfortune, fate finally favored me, and I encountered no obstacles. I spent all my savings, carefully burying the wooden box containing my mom's ashes in the cemetery on the outskirts of Ninghui City. It was a place full of flowers, peaceful and serene, not too far from Zhonghua University, an ideal place for my mom's peaceful rest. Wandering and working in Ninghui for over a year, I stood countless times in front of the gate of Jianghua University, lost in thought. Many visitors came to the campus every day, but I dared not enter until a kind-hearted girl pulled me in. In the alumni hall, I saw a blurry yet familiar photo, with her name and class clearly marked in the lower right corner, Grace, Clinical Medicine Department, Class A. She was no longer the crazy or crippled person in the village, nor did she resemble the disheveled and withered appearance from before. At that moment, she looked beautiful and calm, gazing at me from a distance. They say this lady was Professor Tristan's lifelong dream, unfortunately missing 26 years ago. Now, Professor Tristan remains single, and countless times, he mentions his lost love in front of students. God really has no eyes. I hid in the shadow of a corner, allowing the sharp nails to embed deeply in my palms, tears streaming down without restraint. She was someone else's precious daughter, who should have had her own life, future, and a loving husband. Yesterday, my friend wrote to me, informing me that because of his mental illness, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Good people don't get justice, and bad people live freely. If I hadn't taken her escape money, my mom might have returned to her original life. Maybe I could have been a bit more greedy and stolen more glances at her. The self-escape of thousands of nights collapsed completely at this moment. I shouldn't have stolen, and now I regret it. I regret it. That day, I can't remember how I walked out of Jianghua University or how I reached the cemetery. In the pouring rain, I knelt in front of the grave and broke down in sorrow. The suffocating feeling of not reaching the bottom, with the head unseen, remains desperate yet vivid. A rapid succession of flashbacks, Gavin's figure gradually blurred, replaced by countless times my mom stood in front of me, bearing the domestic violence. Clearly, she was also very scared. In the last moment before consciousness dissipated, the residual tears unconsciously slid down, silently drowning in the salty river water. Mom, I'm sorry, I regret it. Grace, this girl is breathing. With great effort, I lifted my heavy eyelids and vaguely saw a woman rhythmically pressing on my chest. I struggled to wipe away the mist on my eyes, but a nauseating feeling surged from my stomach. Before I could sit up, the salty river water uncontrollably spewed out from my throat. Classmate, wake up. Can you hear my voice? The lively and melodious female voice became clearer, but my consciousness remained chaotic. A slender and fair hand waved in front of my eyes, attracting my mechanical and lifeless gaze. However, in the moment I clearly saw the person's appearance, all the dead silent thoughts boiled like bubbling water, instantly awakening. The last time I saw her was in Jianghua's alumni hall. In the photo, she exuded grace with shoulder-length hair, wearing a moon-white cheongsam, named Grace. Now she wore a neat denim skirt, a wine-red velvet headband accentuating her lively and beautiful features. Mom. My voice, soaked in river water for who knows how long, was hoarse and strained. I couldn't hold back a hint of a sob. Upon hearing this, the young and beautiful woman in front of me looked horrified and grabbed the hand of the man beside her. Tristan, it's over. Is this girl drowned or crazy? The guy called Tristan glanced briefly at the hand he was holding, looking somewhat awkward and frozen in place. This was probably the Professor Tristan who had waited for my mom for over 20 years, still single. But are characters and dreams so real? Realizing this a bit late, I hesitated for a moment and decisively pinched my thigh. The glaring pain almost made me scream. Looking around anxiously, when I saw those bizarre and unique buildings from the last century, an incredible thought gradually emerged in my mind. It seemed like I traveled back. Back to the past when my mom's life was on track, saved by her when she was young due to some twist of fate. The biological father who kidnapped my mom hadn't appeared yet, and the heavy tragedy slept quietly under the futureless. Everything could still be changed. I still sat there, gazing at the bright sun in the sky. The swollen and sour eyes held back the urge to burst into tears. Smiling, I couldn't help but shed tears. Classmate, are you okay? Is there anything I can help you with? The young and beautiful woman, who was still my mom, cautiously approached and crouched beside me, her warm palms tentatively covering my icy hands. The long-lost warmth from her palms, which had once accompanied me through countless nights full of despair, now returned. However, all of this should never have happened in her world. I didn't know why this unexpected time travel occurred or when I would leave this world that didn't originally belong to me. With so many uncertainties, I had to entrust my mom to a relatively reliable person before any tragedies occurred. No matter what the cost. I had to save her. As my scattered thoughts gradually gathered, I wiped away the droplets on my forehead, staring at the almost same-age woman in front of me who was my mom. A bold idea took shape in my mind. Maybe you'll find what I'm about to say absurd, but I can assure you that I haven't lied about a single word. I cautiously touched my mom's fingertips. After confirming that the person in front showed no obvious resistance, I steadied my voice and slowly began, "My name is Savannah, from the future of 2008, the daughter nurtured by you and my dad Tristan." I overlooked a crucial detail. Both my mom and Tristan received higher education, and their academic knowledge far surpassed mine. Talking about time travel in front of two staunch believers in Marxist materialism, evidently, in their cognition, I was a somewhat mentally challenged charlatan. My mom gave me a little face, smiling silently but turning her head to give Tristan wild winks. As for the young man standing behind my mom, he stammered for a while, his ears turning red. I wondered what he was thinking. My mom, unable to endure it any longer, averted her gaze and awkwardly smiled at me. "Savannah, let me take you to my apartment to change clothes. After that, we'll go to the police station to register and find your family, okay?" She slowly helped me stand up, supporting me as I took a few steps to adjust. She led me towards her rented place, casually stepping on Tristan, who was still standing there in a daze. The male college student, slow to react, rushed to my mom's side, running around anxiously. "Grace, I was wrong. I'll buy you the crab roe dumplings you love. Please don't be mad." I squinted my eyes, uncomfortably coughed, and glanced away, but at the same time, I couldn't help but feel happy for my mom. Tristan was much better than my biological father. After arriving at my mom's rented apartment, she pulled me into the bedroom and pointed to the wardrobe against the wall. "Sava, pick whatever clothes you like. Tristan and I will wait for you outside." As soon as the long-lost nickname came out, an invisible hammer seemed to appear in the air, nailing me in place. In different timelines, she once again called me Sava. Unexpectedly, the determination that couldn't be fulfilled before jumping into the river received compensation after drowning. I cautiously changed into a clean denim skirt, and the faint fragrance of soapberry flowers lingered in the air. Looking at the figures not far away, I took a deep breath, almost shedding tears again. "Mom, I understand this is hard for you to comprehend. I can go with you to Zhonghua University Affiliated Hospital for a DNA test. I'm really your biological daughter, not lying to you." Just as I was about to head to the living room, my mom stumbled over, probably startled by my teary voice. She rushed over in a clumsy manner, hugging me awkwardly in a bear hug style. "I believe you, I believe you, I believe you. Hey, don't cry." She hesitated, staring at me up and down for a while, then restlessly poked my cheek with her finger and suddenly burst into laughter. "Upon closer inspection, you do look a bit like me. Oh, by the way, are you still hungry?" My mom's thoughts jumped left and right, like a rabbit hopping up and down. Before I could respond, she suddenly grabbed my hand and ran outside, shouting loudly to Tristan, who was standing in the living room. "Tristan, let's go out for dinner together tonight." My mom and Tristan are both medical professionals, and they are busy with classes at the university during the day, leaving me alone in the apartment. I spend my time flipping through the books on my mom's shelf, waiting for them to take me out to the night market in the evening. One night, while my mom was cutting fruits in the kitchen, Tristan glanced at the kitchen and leaned towards me, speaking softly. "Savannah, could you do me a favor?" Initially, when he first saw me by the lake, perhaps due to his favoritism towards my mom, Tristan believed without a doubt and even ahead of my mom that I was her daughter from elsewhere. However, every time I called him Dad in front of my mom, he blushed and stammered, the first time encountering such a proper and embarrassed father. I put down the newspaper in my hand, pretending to be puzzled. "Dad, what's the matter?" Tristan, looking uneasy, glanced at the kitchen. After confirming that my mom hadn't noticed our conversation, he sighed in relief. "At 6:30 next Wednesday night, room 1 on the 3rd floor of the Phelan Art Gallery, 32, London Street. Could you please take Grace there? I want to give her a surprise." I readily agreed. "Don't worry, consider it done." However, promises and confidence don't always guarantee a smooth outcome. I told my mom there was an event at that art gallery, where they not only gave away strawberry cakes but also offered a chance for free photos. With such a flawless and perfect reason, my mom believed without a doubt. But on the night we actually rushed there, riding a tricycle towards Toronto Street, the driver misheard and took us to London Street instead. Toronto Street and London Street, one in the south and the other in the north. My mom and I, 2 adults, got lost on London Street for almost half an hour. To make matters worse, London Street was deserted, and we couldn't find any available transportation. In my desperate moments, my mom suddenly tapped me forcefully, pointing to a human-powered tricycle that appeared tens of meters away, seemingly out of nowhere. But when I and my mom ran closer, looking at the tricycle driver's face, I couldn't help but tremble. My mom pulled me onto the tricycle, staying close to me. "Driver, go to Phelan Art Gallery on Toronto Street." I stared fixedly at the young man, and when I saw the birthmark on his wrist, an involuntary shiver ran down my spine. It felt like a cold snake had appeared out of nowhere, sliding chillingly around my neck, hissing venomously towards my major artery. Countless sharp and tearing sounds screamed in my mind, urging me to run quickly. After safely arriving at the art gallery, I dragged my mom off the tricycle as if escaping, nearly stumbling to the ground. That night, Tristan presented flowers to my mom, expressing his feelings. It should have been a happy occasion for a perfect match of talent and beauty. I should have been thrilled. But I huddled in a corner, with my mind wandering in a daze, and the deep-seated unease almost drove me crazy. Because that tricycle driver was my future father, Gavin, the man who tortured my mom and me for over 20 years, and ruined my mom's entire life. He suddenly appeared. For several consecutive nights, I woke up from nightmares, experiencing sleepless nights and persistent palpitations. The scenes of Gavin wielding an iron rod and striking both me and my mom were still vivid and despairing in my memory. However, each time I struggled to wake up and saw my mom sleeping soundly on the adjacent bed, still young, I felt a lingering sense of relief, grateful that there was still a chance to save everything. My mom mostly followed Tristan at the university, and whenever she returned to the apartment, she always brought me along. By deliberately avoiding London Street, I could indirectly reduce my mom's encounters with Gavin. However, fate had its own plans. On the 36th day after my return to the past, a sudden magnitude 7.2 earthquake struck Ninghui City in the middle of the night. Fortunately, I was still awake that day, perhaps due to my partial deafness, making my other senses unusually sensitive. Sensing something wrong when the disaster was just beginning and before the violent shaking started, I immediately woke up my mom. I dragged her out of the apartment, rushing towards open spaces with all my might. In just over 10 minutes, the earth shook violently, and countless small houses collapsed in an instant. Cries, pleas for help, the sound of running footsteps, and the collapse of high walls blended into a chaotic symphony, turning the once peaceful Ninghui City into a tumultuous and hellish nightmare. Countless people who were sleeping were buried under the debris. My mom sat in a daze on the ground, looking at the hellish scene of Ninghui City. She suddenly rushed into my arms, crying uncontrollably. Sava. It was a feeling of narrowly escaping death. Under the intense tremors, we, along with others seeking refuge, stayed in place, afraid to move. My mom silently sat on the ground, hugging her knees, crying as she stared at the direction of Jianghua University. Tristan lived in the university dormitory. In this era without mobile phones or other convenient communication tools, everything was unknown and terrifying for her. I looked at my mom's pale face, covered her icy hand, stroked her back, and whispered in her ear. Mom, don't worry, my dad will be safe. Look, isn't your daughter from the future proof that both you and my dad are fine? It wasn't until the first light of dawn appeared that Ninghui City returned to tranquility. When experienced individuals around confirmed it was safe to move, my mom, with swollen eyes, grabbed me and ran towards Jianghua University. Before she could run a kilometer, the familiar tall figure rushed from a distance. The young man's clean clothes were covered in dust, perhaps injured on his way, with a glaring wound on his knee. I stood at the place where the morning sun was rising, watching them sprint towards each other, embracing tightly above despair and desolation, after surviving the calamity. The enormous disaster caught everyone off guard, and for a while, there was a severe shortage of rescue personnel in Ninghui City. My mom and Tristan took me to the university to volunteer. With their relevant expertise, they were assigned to assist at a makeshift first aid station. Meanwhile, driven by personal reasons, I volunteered to carry stretchers and transport the injured. However, as the saying goes, man proposes, God disposes. Despite my efforts to prevent my mom from meeting Gavin, fate, in its unpredictable ways, continued to play cruel tricks on these innocent souls. During the post-disaster reconstruction, one noon, several guys rushed to my mom with a stretcher, looking flustered. Sister, there's a critically injured patient from London Street who needs your and the teacher's urgent help. The patient on the stretcher was unconscious, and his original features were obscured by large patches of blood. However, the dark red birthmark on his left wrist was unmistakably visible. Under the scorching sun, I stood frozen as chills ran down my spine, my eyes red, staring at the stretcher that my mom hurriedly brought into the operating room. For the first time, I felt the malicious intent emanating from fate so clearly. It shamelessly exploited my mom's duty to save lives, forcibly presenting that man who had deceived her as an injured patient, right before her eyes. Anxiously, I waited outside the emergency room, fervently hoping for the surgery to fail. Gavin better not survive on that operating table. After more than 6 hours, my mom, dragging her exhausted body, emerged from the emergency room. Seeing me waiting at the door, she adjusted her state, wearing her surgical gown tightly, and smiled at me with a prideful thumbs-up gesture. Like a beautiful and noble white peacock, she seemed to say, "Look, daughter, isn't your mom amazing? I've snatched another person from the clutches of death." I mimicked her, smiling at her with a triumphant thumbs-up. However, deep inside, despair emitted a chilling aura. My mom, still young, lacked the omniscient perspective of 20 years later. She didn't know that the patient she had just rescued was the demon tormenting her for over 2 decades. But all I wanted was for my mom to peacefully live out her life with her beloved, shining brightly in her chosen field, without bearing the pain that shouldn't belong to her. So, I couldn't and wouldn't reveal all the darkness of those years to my still young mom. Therefore, I had no reason to stop her from saving Gavin. She was destined to be a doctor, and saving lives was her calling. I would always be proud of her. However, that didn't mean I would stand idly by and let the malicious fate unfold once again. Since I, a person already dead, could return to the past, there was nothing inevitable that couldn't be changed. Whatever the cost, even if it meant facing death once again, I would save her. The good news is that Gavin is still in a coma. After completing the escort for the injured, I spent the whole day by my mom's side, closely following her to check on the patients. My mom, busy as she was, became noticeably thinner. I couldn't bear seeing the dark circles under her eyes, so I handed her a cup of warm water. Ignoring her protests, I forcefully took the tray of medicine from her and made her sit on the resting bed. "Mom, let me handle feeding the patients from now on. You've been working tirelessly all this time, and it's too exhausting. Don't worry, I've been following you for 5 or 6 days. I know exactly when to administer which medicine, and there are labels on these trays." The young girl wanted to say more, but perhaps she was too exhausted. As soon as she lay down on the bed, she closed her eyes, sinking into a deep sleep. I placed the tray down and gently settled my mom on the bed, tucking her in with the blanket. "Mom, get a good rest." Turning around, I discreetly took out the bottle labeled Gavin, emptied the blood-activating and stasis-dissolving pills, and replaced them with roughly the same amount of vitamin C. Based on the recent rounds with my mom, Gavin's left leg was seriously injured, and he remained unconscious in the small single-patient room. I worked hard to make him disabled. After all, back when my mom was abducted by him and trapped in the village, her right leg was crippled by this Gavin. "Gavin, it's time for your medicine." Still young, Gavin raised his head in a daze, unconsciously swallowing the medicine with the water in the glass. I stared absent-mindedly at Gavin, seemingly as insignificant as an ant, reaching out my right hand to gently touch his neck. Then, I applied a sudden force with all 5 fingers. His heavy breathing, the terrifying bulging of veins on his neck and forehead due to lack of oxygen, but his eyes remained tightly shut. Who would have thought that the feeble man before me was the same person as the madman from the future? It was indeed challenging for Gavin to wake up earlier. I even had the power to send him to eternal sleep if I applied a bit more force. However, I wasn't foolish enough to invite trouble at this crucial moment. I haven't seen my mom and Professor Tristan's wedding yet, so rest assured, I won't do anything stupid. Muttering absent-mindedly, I released Gavin's shackles at the last moment of his suffocation. He remained unconscious, like a withering and fragile vine. Before leaving, I glanced at the empty water bottle in the corner, casually picked it up, filled it with water, and placed it on the bedside table. "If, unfortunately, you wake up, I believe you'll willingly pave your way to the underworld." 5 days after old Gavin fell into a coma, I, unable to sleep once again, put on my clothes and went out for a breath of fresh air. Unexpectedly, I heard his groans. Gavin had actually awakened. "Water. I want water. Is anyone there?" I stood at the door with a flashlight in hand, the piercing light shining directly at him. The rhythm of my heartbeat became increasingly rapid. His left leg was encased in a heavy plaster cast, rendering him unable to move. Perhaps my sudden appearance with the flashlight startled him. Gavin squinted, struggling to catch his breath, and laboriously lifted his head to look at me. "Could you, nurse, please give me some water?" I was somewhat surprised by his polite tone. At least in my memory, Gavin and the word politeness were never associated. Silently, I took an empty water bottle from the side, filled it with water, and handed it to him, holding my arms. Your most severe injury is in your leg. I've given you water, you can sit up and drink it yourself. As soon as I finished speaking, without any warning, Gavin clenched the plastic water bottle and suddenly threw it at me. Along with it came his insane ranting. You're pretending even when giving water. If I could move, I'd have killed you. I rubbed my right hand, which was hit, crouched down to pick up the water bottle that had slid under the table. However, as soon as I turned around, I met Gavin's unabashedly vulgar gaze. He whistled and said, "You've got a nice figure." Before I could react, Gavin impatiently lifted the blanket. My face instantly turned cold. Some things were better off dead. I grabbed the water bottle and viciously smashed it towards that area. He screamed in pain, angrily cursing again. I wasn't about to indulge him. Without hesitation, I raised my hand and slapped him repeatedly, left and right, with force. Open your mouth and drink this entire bottle of water. Upon seeing what I held in my hand, Gavin shrank back, clutching the water bottle, desperately pouring it into his stomach. In less than a minute, the nearly 2L bottle was emptied. The next moment, his hand holding the water bottle suddenly loosened, and he, without warning, convulsed a few times before collapsing backward. The empty water bottle fell to the floor, making a not-so-light sound. I quietly closed the door, glanced at the moonlit night outside, and turned away without any ripples. The dark night of over 20 years ago seemed to slowly descend once again. Waking up once again, it was already noon. The sunlight nonchalantly streamed in through the window, dazzling my eyes. My mom, enjoying a rare break, sat by the bed, flipping through 6 records of A Floating Life, borrowed from the school library, wearing a freshly cleaned volunteer work uniform. Sava, Tristan is with the professor in the city for study. They probably won't be back for a week. How should we arrange things these days? I stretched lazily, tired yet satisfied, leaning against her side. Absently, I took a slice of orange from her hand and stuffed it into my mouth. The fragrance of the orange filled my taste buds in an instant. Mom, did the temporary rescue center finally give you a break? My mom propped her chin, glancing at me with a teasing look. Yes, after all, most of the patients have recovered from minor injuries. She seemed to recall something, closing the book and taking my hand. With a strange expression, she said, Sava, do you remember the patient with the severe leg injury last week? I went for rounds at 6 this morning, and his bed was unexpectedly empty. I didn't expect another patient to leave without notice overnight. My heart sank, and my fingertips unconsciously tightened. The next moment, I accidentally caused my mom pain, and she yelped. I anxiously released my hand, intending to check if her finger joints were okay. However, my mom playfully tapped my head without reservation. Sava, what are you thinking? I shook my head somewhat disheveled, and my left hand, covered under the blanket, unconsciously twisted the joints of my index finger. Nothing, just thinking about whether a patient who just recovered and is alone might have some trouble. Why hasn't he died yet? I lowered my brows, reluctantly pulling out a perfunctory smile. However, the heart in my chest was restlessly moving around, as if foretelling some unsafe disaster. As a precaution, I didn't let my mom go outside, especially when Tristan was not around these days. Mom, for the next few days, I want to stay home and read. Let's go shopping for clothes when Dad comes back, okay? I pointed to the small but functional kitchen in the corner, softened my tone, and swayed her arm, pretending to be spoiled. Eating outside too much can be boring. I want to personally cook your favorite dishes. You haven't tried my cooking yet. My mom was particularly easy to please when it came to food. As soon as she heard that I could cook, a small white light seemed to click in her eyes. With the vegetables we had stocked up on these days, the two of us comfortably stayed in the temporary shelter for 5 days. On the 6th day, while my mom was still sleeping in, I properly locked the shelter door, picked up a cloth backpack, and went to the market to buy groceries. When I returned with bags full of fruits and vegetables, the tightly closed door suddenly swung open. My mom was gone. A profound sense of anxiety and fear surged up. I hastily threw down everything in my hands, rushing out as if gone mad. Before I could run out of the alley, a man's voice suddenly came from behind. Harper. I almost instinctively responded, but just as I was about to turn around, a cold sweat suddenly covered my spine. No one in this timeline could possibly know that Gavin and I share a last name. Unless this person is also from the future. I was about to sprint away, but the person behind me was a step ahead. Before I could react, a heavy blow from a club hit me. Everything went black in front of my eyes. I woke up in an abandoned factory, bound to a metal pillar with my back against it. My mom lay on the ground, her condition uncertain, covered in bruises. In the distance, Gavin wielded an iron rod, tapping it against his palm in a familiar and sinister manner. This was the Gavin from my own time, the one who committed heinous acts and died in prison. Helpless, bound tightly to the metal pillar, I could only move my eyes, contemplating the man not far away, especially his seemingly agile left leg. Maybe my gaze was too conspicuous. Gavin dragged his limp leg, holding the rod, and ruthlessly smashed it down on my left cheekbone. The force he used felt familiar, it was indeed that of the madman. Struggling, I managed to pull out a blade hidden in the fabric of my sleeve, slowly and calmly grinding it against the coarse rope. It seems you didn't manage to walk out of prison alive in your past life. It's a pity I won't be able to scatter your ashes myself. Gavin kicked me in the abdomen, mercilessly delivering a series of slaps. I bit my lip, enduring the pain, as I accelerated the process of cutting the rope behind me. Suddenly, Gavin yanked all of my hair, bringing his grotesque face close. I regret not killing you when you were born, a worthless brat, just like your mother. Thinking of harming the younger me in return, are you tired of living? Lukili, I escaped fast. He rambled away, returning with a rusty long-handled hammer. Taking aim at my left leg, he was about to strike. Bang! Swiftly turning and avoiding the cut rope, I snatched the hammer. Gavin, off balance due to inertia, tumbled backward. Half crouching, I pressed my thigh against his spine, using the leverage to confront him. Simultaneously, I picked up a nearby thick rope and looped it around his neck. Panicking, Gavin kicked his legs, hands frantically trying to free himself from the rope, his muffled words unclear. Grace Didi, what did you do to my mom? Anxious, I inadvertently weakened the force holding him, and Gavin seized the opportunity to break free, turning the tables on me. He grabbed my throat, his strength overwhelming me. I'll make you and your mother companions in the afterlife. Gavin approached, laughing maniacally in my ear. Unexpected, right? This original body almost went into shock and died. But guess what? Your mother rushed over for first aid as soon as you left. Thanks to your mother, I got this new lease on life. I apologize for not killing you too. It really wasn't worth coming here. She was the one I kidnapped back then, always leeching off me. If she didn't deserve a beating, I wouldn't have ended up in prison for nothing. Damn it. I struggled to kick the person in front of me, but due to severe oxygen deprivation, my limbs gradually lost strength. In a daze, I seemed to catch a glimpse of Gavin massaging his left leg, and picking up the long-handled hammer beside him. Bang! Gavin was the one who fell. The thunderous crash as he hit the ground brought me back to some level of awareness, but I couldn't muster the strength to get up. I was too exhausted. I didn't even have the energy to figure out who had saved me, and I contemplated surrendering to a prolonged slumber right there. However, in the next moment, the person in front of me forcefully pulled me up and carried me away, running as if her life depended on it. We hadn't gone far when she suddenly tripped over something, causing both of us to tumble. Sava. My mom's panicked cry echoed from behind. This fall almost brought back all 3 souls and 7 spirits that I had seemingly left behind. I propped myself up from the floor, shaking my head. I wasn't sure if my lips were bleeding, the taste of strong blood filled my mouth. As I focused my eyes, Gavin, holding his bloody head with one hand and dragging a long-handled hammer with the other, was steadily advancing towards us. Mom, find a place to hide. Gritting my teeth, I rushed forward. I intended to pull my mom behind me, but she suddenly dashed towards Gavin like a missile. My mom agilely dodged behind him, delivering a powerful kick to his left leg. Simultaneously, she kicked the fallen long-handled hammer towards me. In the next moment, Gavin, weakened, fell to the ground, emitting a piercing scream. He received a paralyzing injection, but the effects are wearing off, my mom explained. In the blink of an eye, Gavin, who had been howling, lunged towards us. Oh, I forgot to tell you. The last paralyzing injection, I administered it less than 2 minutes ago. Are you ready to make your last words? Gavin, acting madly, approached my mom, deliberately taunting her loudly enough for me to hear, maintaining the same intensity in his elbow strikes. My eyelids twitched unexpectedly. Yet my mom seemed to have known everything beforehand. She fiercely kicked the man behind her, showing no signs of surprise or anger. In the next moment, she was holding a surgical knife, seemingly materialized out of nowhere. Sava, grab the hammer, quickly. Obediently following my mom's command, my actions were faster than my thoughts. Before I could comprehend the situation, the hammer was already swung. Gavin was sent flying 10 meters away by the force of the hammer. My mom swiftly sidestepped to my side, breathing heavily. "Mom, why did you save Gavin that night? You shouldn't have saved him." Before I could finish asking, Gavin, lying on the ground, suddenly pulled out a lighter, ignited it, and threw it down from the second floor to the first. A tremendous explosion reverberated from below. Behind me, Gavin, sprawled on the ground, erupted into near-mad laughter. "A burial with you, I want all of you to be buried with me." My mom's face suddenly changed, and she pulled me to the window, smashing the glass with the hammer. The corner on the first floor is filled with gas canisters. We can only escape by jumping out from here. Fortunately, there's a river below, Sava, you. Before she could finish, I directly lifted her securely from behind and leaped out of the window without hesitation. Boom! A series of intense explosions followed one after another. The shockwaves, intensified by the high temperature, struck my back precisely, and sharp pain quickly swept through my entire body. I landed in the water and involuntarily coughed up a mouthful of blood. All consciousness dissipated rapidly, as if the tide was receding. My mom dragged me to the shore, strangely reminding me of the night when, at 16, I pulled her out of the river. But this time, I hadn't used her life-saving money, and she didn't need to worry about facing endless humiliation upon returning. Her future was bright and radiant, with loved ones and a wonderful career she cherished. She wouldn't be trafficked to a remote mountain village, chained around her neck, or robbed of her escape money by her ungrateful daughter. But it's a pity. I didn't get to see my mom wearing a wedding dress, marrying Professor Tristan. At that time, my mom would undoubtedly be the most beautiful bride in the world. Sava, hang in there. I'll call for help and take you to the hospital. Hold on a bit longer. Mom is a doctor, she'll definitely save you, Sava. Clear sobbing reached my ears from afar. Large teardrops fell like broken strings from above, hitting my face. The villain was dead, so why was she crying? I wanted to open my eyes, wipe away her tears, tell her not to be afraid, that I was okay. But my eyelids felt so heavy, I couldn't lift them. However, I still had some strength to chat with her for a while. I had so many questions, but I didn't know where to start. I wanted to ask her, when did you find out about all this? Did you hate me during those years, for being a hypocritical and selfish child? But this time, I didn't run away. Mom, can you not dislike me? After much hesitation, what lingered in my mouth was just a belated apology from a cycle of reincarnation. Mom, I'm sorry. Because I really had no strength left. I love you, so much. But it seems I can no longer be your child. Epilogue. The day Grace traveled back was just an unusually calm afternoon. The original Grace and Tristan had just finished a surgery with their mentor, exhausted, and were napping in the rest area. However, 2 hours later, Grace, struggling to escape from nightmares, stood up. She was now the Grace from 20 years in the future. As memories flooded back, she stumbled and nearly fell, but Tristan, alert, caught her just in time. Grace, like avoiding a plague, chose to bury these memories deep within, day after day hypnotizing herself that it was all just a nightmare. Until 1 year later, by the river near the university, she saw the familiar girl crying and calling her Mom. Grace felt a bit panicked. Her rational self urged her to stay away from Harper, but she couldn't bear to leave her alone. Oh, Harper had unilaterally changed her last name, adopting the surname of her childhood friend and lover. But did she do that to win Harper's affection and kindness? Initially, Grace thought Harper would resist Savannah forever. After all, she was the child forced into existence by a trafficker, not a product of love between her and Tristan. However, after that earthquake, when Savannah risked her life to run out for her sake, there was never a moment when she thought of leaving her behind. Grace wavered again. The little troublemaker who used to only know how to run away had grown up. Eventually, Grace realized she didn't really hate this little troublemaker. It was Gavin lying on the emergency operating table whose life and death were uncertain. At that moment, with a surgical knife in her hand, all Grace could think was, if Gavin dies, will my daughter also disappear? Grace didn't dare to take that risk, she couldn't bear it. She thought that by letting Gavin live, she and the little troublemaker could stay far away from him, avoiding the tragedy from repeating itself. But no one expected the future monster to also return to the past. The child who always hid behind her, crying in distress at being beaten, and wiping tears while apologizing, protected her with an impenetrable shield just before death arrived. Mom, I'm sorry. That was the last thing the little troublemaker left her before dying. That night by the riverbank, Grace hugged Harper tightly, repeatedly saying, "It's okay," and "I love you," to her daughter's lifeless head. But her daughter couldn't hear anymore. Grace sat there all night, refusing to close her eyes, afraid that she might forget everything related to Savannah in a moment of mental laxity. Just like Grace couldn't resist tiredness and fell into a deep sleep. When she woke up again, she was in a makeshift house in the aftermath of the disaster, as she habitually opened the curtains. It seemed like she had had a big dream, different from the ones before. But she couldn't remember it at all. Intuition told her that she had forgotten someone or something important. Grace looked at the small kitchen nearby, wondering why the stove was so new, as if someone had cooked delicious meals for her. But as she looked, tears suddenly fell without warning.